Scott Lauber from the Inquirer, covers the Phillies, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And, a couple of days ago, Scott, it sounded like baseball was like, we are intending to play, but they didn't really have any blueprint. Has that changed now? Are we getting a clearer picture of what baseball's plan is? Because it sounds like they are optimistic about getting out there, and maybe sooner than later.
No, I think that's still the truth, Mike. I think that they are optimistic. Let me start here. Let me say this, that, and I wrote this the other day, that at a time when owners and players don't seem to agree on much, they are unanimous in their agreement that they would rather play. Some season is better than no season. There is uniformity in that. There is universal agreement in that. And so, that's step one. I think that's the reason why there's so much optimism, is that everybody wants the same thing. Now, getting it is a different story. And a lot of the factors that will go into whether or not they can come back are out of their control. The virus in a lot of ways is dictating what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why, states might be starting to reopen and whatnot, but, baseball's not going to come back tomorrow. And I think one of the reasons for that is that they need to let this play out a little bit more, and they need to figure out what's safe and what's not. We still can't have gatherings over a certain number of people state by state, and certainly a baseball game between two teams, even without fans in the stands, exceeds the number of people that are allowed to gather. So no one's quite there yet from a health and safety perspective, and I think what you're seeing and what you've heard over the last few weeks is Major League Baseball officials basically trying to come up with as many ideas as they possibly can for how this might work, so that when the public health and safety officials come forward and say, okay, we think it's safe to put a team back together in one place, that they're not first sitting there trying to sift through how do we do this. So I think they're brainstorming a lot of concepts. They're trying to come up with some plans. They're trying to figure out what's doable and not doable, and so that once they get the all clear, they can pick a plan and try to put it in motion.
Okay, so we've heard a lot of plans. Arizona, Grapefruit League, Cactus League, throw Texas into the mix. Now a East, Central, and West where you play in your home stadium. Do any of these sound like they are better than the others, or any of them more viable than the others? Does baseball hold one in the higher regard than the others?
Well, I think everyone would agree that in a perfect world, well, I shouldn't say perfect world, because in a perfect world, you're going to have fans at these games. But, of those plans that you mentioned, the one that I think would appeal to the most amount of people is the East, Central, West playing your own ballpark plan. That way, players can live where they live during the season, and no one has to be isolated in an Arizona biosphere, away from their families and away from their loved ones in the midst of all of this. So I think that everyone would certainly prefer being able to play in their own cities and in their own ballparks. Now, is that going to be possible? It's not possible today. Is it going to look more likely a month from now? Maybe. Is it going to look more likely once we get more widespread testing and tracing? Certainly. That's another aspect of this. When I talk about, what's out of baseball's hands, no matter what they do, if they try to get teams together to play, they're going to need testing availability for the players. And right now, I don't know that that's the case. So, I think everyone would rather stay where they are instead of having to go to some neutral site or play in the Arizona heat in 110 degrees in the middle of the summer and whatnot. But, right now it's hard to say what's possible, because I don't know that any one of them could be executed tomorrow anyway.
Right, and obviously we're in a spot here where they said, according to the report anyway, I guess Bob Nightingale from the USA Today suggested late June, July 2nd at the latest. Does that sound aggressive to you, or does that sound like, no, I feel like they can get their ducks in a row by then?
I don't know if they can get their ducks in a row, but that certainly sounds like a reasonable date to shoot for. And I say that because it's going to take a few days. I mean, from what I hear from the people I talk to, if we're being realistic about it, it's going to take a few days for everyone to gather together for the restart of spring training. You're going to need 2 weeks minimum, probably closer to 3 or 4 of a spring training. Probably not a full 4 weeks, but somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks of spring training to get everybody, back in shape to start playing games again. Specifically, the pitchers who've had to scale back or plateau a little bit here over these last 6 or 7 weeks. And if you work backwards from, let's say, the 4th of July, you can spend the next month or so trying to figure out what's feasible, what's not feasible, and try to have a plan in place by, Memorial Day, 1st of June, and then start to put that in motion. So, I certainly think if you work backwards from the 4th of July, you're giving yourself essentially another month here to figure out what you can do. And maybe that's enough time. Maybe it isn't enough time. But they're also going to reach a point if they get too far past, the 4th of July and into summer where, it's going to be difficult to have a representative season. It's going to be difficult to be able to play enough games to say you had a season, and maybe you've got to think further outside the box at that point. Like, let's have some sort of tournament-style season that leads to a playoff, that leads to a championship. Who knows? But I think if they want to salvage a season, July 4th is a good day to circle, or that week is a good week to circle on your calendar, because it gives them a month now to kind of figure out what they can and can't do.
Yeah, you wonder, how long can the league kind of wait before it makes its decision on when we can start this thing up, and how late are they willing to kind of dive? I guess the one plan that Nightingale threw out suggested they're going to be playing playoff games in like November. Then you wonder, are you playing those at neutral sites? Are you playing, are the Minnesota Twins, if they're in the playoffs, playing a November home game? I mean, those are other things I guess they have to consider as well. So you have to think about how long can they wait before deciding on any concept.
Right, and when does one season start to infringe upon the next?
Season,
I mean, there's an off season for a reason. So not only does weather become a concern in some cities? Can you play in November? But how far into November or early December can you go and still have players, and again, specifically pitchers, get the rest that they need in the off season to be ready to come back in spring training in 2021? You don't want to jeopardize next season in order to maximize this season, which is already going to be compromised anyway. So, there's I don't know whether baseball is in a better position or not than, let's say, the NBA or NHL, where they're already well into their seasons, and the question now becomes, do you come back? Do you go straight into playoffs? Do you scrap the whole thing and focus on the fall? Baseball can essentially define the season however it wants to, because it hasn't started yet. So you could play 80 games. You could try to play 100 games. You could play fewer than 80 and have, like I said, some sort of weird, kind of March Madness sort of tournament-style thing to determine a champion. No matter what you do, the 2020 season for Major League Baseball is going to be a weird one. It's going to be one that we look back on and go, oh, yeah, that was the year of the coronavirus and they weren't able to start on time, so they had to do this wacky thing. They can essentially define their season however they'd like. And I think that's why, from people I talk to and from what I'm hearing, they can take a month now and try to hash out what it would take to get a season going by about the 4th of July. And if they can't do that, they can pivot from there and start something later than that if they need to, and figure out how to do it.
Scott Lauber is with us from the Inquirer, Inquirer.com. Check out his piece regarding the timeline here. And you wonder, without putting you into a political corner here, but the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, apparently was on a radio station and said that he called the commissioner and said, any chance that we can get baseball getting going? Like, you would think baseball would say to him, any chance we can start playing, not the other way around here. But it sounds as like, some of the doctors are saying, I don't know that we should be playing baseball anytime soon, yet they're getting kind of, escorted down the diamond here. Like, hey, let's get you back out on the diamond. It seems like there's a weird push going on.
I think it's funny. I think sometimes people forget that these are, the players, the coaches, the managers, the equipment people, the trainers, the medical staff, all the people who are needed to put on a Major League Baseball game are people. They're not just things you see through your television, two-dimensional objects or images that you see on your television. They're people. So if you say, all right, look, we really want baseball. Everyone wants baseball. You want to watch it on your TV. That's great. Let's get everybody quarantined in Arizona and put them in a biosphere and a bubble, and we'll have baseball back. Well, that's great if you're sitting in your living room and you're watching a game, but there are actual people who have to,
Right.
who have to do that. And it's, I've heard different things here. People say, oh, well, it's part of the deal. It's not part of the deal. Nobody signed up for that. It's not like you were signing up to go into the military to be away from your friends and family. So, sacrifices are going to have to be made in every industry across the board. Baseball is probably not any different from that. If you're going to want to have baseball, the people who are involved in the sport are going to have to make sacrifices in order to make that happen. But, you've got to be safe about it. You've got to make sure that everybody can stay healthy. That means that they need access to testing. They probably need access to monitoring or tracing. I mean, a few weeks ago, I talked to Ben Lively and David Buchanan, a couple of ex-Phillies pitchers who are over in Korea. They're getting ready to start their season on Monday, I believe, Monday or Tuesday. And, they were telling me that, just to go to practice, this was even before they started their quote-unquote spring training games. You got to the ballpark and you had your temperature taken. And, if somebody gets sick, there's a plan in place for how they can deal with that. We're not there yet. We're not at that stage yet where a player can walk into the ballpark, get his temperature taken, have his health monitored, and make sure that everybody's healthy and ready to go. And until that happens, it's hard to see
Right.
Teams regathering.
Crazy as it sounds, it's accurate that we just aren't at that spot yet. Scott Lauber's with us. And then, we talked about 2 weeks ago, by the way, as Scott Lauber joined us to talk about his book, The Men and Moments That Made Phillies Baseball the Big 50. You can get that book anywhere now and check it out. It's out. When we had him on, it was not out yet, but it is now out, and you can check out your copy, The Big 50 Men and Moments That Made Phillies Baseball. When we were talking about the book, we did ask about the minor leagues, and you got guys like Spencer Howard and Alec Boehm. What happens to those guys if they don't have a minor league season or a place to kind of get assigned to?
Yeah, I mean, the minor leagues are a whole other issue for baseball right now because, you can bring back Major League Baseball and have them play in empty stadiums, and it's not ideal and it's not what anybody wants, but somewhere around in the neighborhood of 60%, I think, of revenues come from television deals. So teams can still make money to pay and players can still get paid, and you can still have an operation. It doesn't really work that way in the minor leagues. If you don't have people at the games, there's really no revenue stream. And so if fans can't attend these games, minor league seasons are probably going to have to be canceled. And, that raises the question of, in talking about players like Spencer Howard and Alec Boehm, I think what you'll see is major league teams, major league teams will have expanded rosters to start, but they'll also, I think, carry taxi squads where instead of calling a player up from AAA, you'll just have a taxi squad on hand. I would imagine this is how it's going to be, so that you could replace a player. And that's good for prospects like Alec Boehm and Spencer Howard. They'll have a place to play or somewhere to go. But what do you do if you're just, a regular minor league player in AA or single A or AAA for that matter, who's not on a 40-man roster or not on a prospect track? I mean, let's face it, the large majority of minor leaguers don't make it to the big leagues. And, that's a whole other issue, is what do they do, if there's no season? Do they, there are a lot of minor league players, the vast majority of them, who don't make a lot of money, and it's a seasonal sport, and, you wonder whether there are going to be a bunch of minor league players who can't afford to play anymore because they have to go and get a real job somewhere. So, that's a whole other, I think, vastly underreported aspect of all of this that we're not talking about because we're so preoccupied with how is MLB going to come back?
Exactly. And as John Heyman reported earlier today, that early July remains the target for the season, a spring training 2.0. Possibly. We'll see. We'll keep our eye on it. Scott Lauber from the Philadelphia Inquirer, kind enough to join us. He has a great article that is very in-depth and talks about all this at Inquirer.com, and he was kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Sure, Mike, anytime.
And make sure you get a copy of Scott's book, The Men and Moments That Made the Philadelphia Phillies. It's called The Big 50. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.